I am the executive director of Walls Down Ministry, and also a pastoral counselor. And so when you talk about LGBTQ issues in the church, you kind of expand a little bit to talk about just sexuality in general. And so this isn't a talk I typically give, but it is something that is in kind of our sphere of addressing, certainly. And this is also a personal issue for me as well. My life has not lacked being graphic since I was 9 years of age. And so if you know part of my story, I won't share that, but I was sexually abused for 6 years, from the time I was 9 to the time I was 15, pretty severe sexual abuse. And I was a regular porn user before I even hit puberty, before I really even had an idea of what sex was about, before I really had even gone through puberty. Pornography was a regular part of my week. This was right when the internet was coming of age, and right when parents didn't think that their good little boys and good little girls would ever, we didn't need, I don't even know that we had internet filters back then. So, this has been so I have regularly had a graphic experience in this world. And I know that I'm not alone. You don't have to be sexually abused or have had access to pornography to have a graphic experience in this world. This world is graphic. It's a very sexually graphic world. This is the culture that we live in. But I do want you to know that when we talk about this topic, it has a high level of or high capacity to shame someone, because we've often talked about sex and pornography in the church in a way that shames somebody rather than freeing people up to walk forward and grow forward with God. That's what I hope to do. That's why we start with shame and why your identity is so important, because you can't address pornography very well if you're not willing to see your own identity as fixed, loved by God, and that you can't do anything about. You can't sin your way out of being loved by being a beloved child of God, which thank God for that. So just in case you need to know that this isn't just an issue out there, that's an issue in here. You can go to that next slide if you want. 50% of pastors are looking consistently. That's 68% of men in the church. 33% of women in general. That's probably the most varying statistic that I found. And I did try to pull from a number of different sources so that I wasn't just doing one or grabbing from one. 94% of children will see it before age 14. 94%. It takes one kid on the bus with unfiltered access to pornography on a smartphone, which most all kids have, on a bus to expose all of our children to it. It's a graphic world that we live in. So I'm wanting to prepare my sons. I'm just trying to prepare my sons for, hey, this is what will happen when you see it. And that's not me being hopeless about the situation. I want to prepare my son for the real world. You will likely see pornography at some point in your life. I want you to be prepared for it before you do. And it increases the infidelity rate by 300%. So this isn't an issue out there. This is an issue in here. The reason I said 50% of pastors looking consistently, I did not give a number because I know what we do with that. If you are better than the average, heart is filled with pride. Hey, I'm doing pretty well. If you're looking at it more consistently than the average, you're like, man, I am a loser just like I thought I was. Neither one of those are Jesus, so I did not put what I actually found in the statistics of how often it is, because I know what human people do with those statistics. We compare ourselves among ourselves. We're never supposed to do that. So you're welcome. So what I want us to do is, first of all, I want us to breathe. Because I know when we start talking about this thing, it kind of sucks the life out of the room. I mean, I talk about LGBTQ issues in church, so I know what it's like to have a story that sucks the life and the air right out of the room. So what I want us to do is to breathe and know that this is not something we're talking about out there. It's something we're talking about in here, and that this affects most of us. This is not even considering the fact that people who are not looking but are struggling and are tempted consistently. So breathe, because passion, desire, and fantasy are all human and given to us by God himself. Not always convenient. I've asked God to remove all of those things from my life, and he has been very clear that he's not doing that. Now, if you don't like the word fantasy because it's been so linked to sex, you can use the word imagination. God has given us an imagination as part of being an image bearer of God. So passion, desire, and imagination are all intrinsically human and are all good and can be blessed by God. So I want us to deal with this well. I won't go over the Genesis 2 and 3. I'm so glad that you covered that. That's where we need to find out where shame is the cyclical process that keeps us often trapped in cycles of addiction, specifically to pornography. And so our church approach has been, and I think we all know that our church approach to pornography and sexual issues is intrinsically broken. What we typically will say is pull your pants up, get an accountability partner, and then pray and fast for freedom. And who knows, that is not helpful. And in that order, pull your pants up first, then get an accountability partner, and then pray and fast for freedom, because we have been told that most of God's work that happens in our lives happens right around this area right here. And guys, I'm part of a charismatic tradition, Pentecostal tradition, and I know that there are powerful experiences that we have up here at the altar, and I'm not diminishing that. What I will say is that most of the freedom in my life has not happened here. It doesn't happen at the altar. It happens day in and day out of walking with Jesus, exposing myself to him, bring my whole self before God, and allowing him to touch the very wounds in the areas that he desires to touch and fill. Now, sometimes I've been delivered up here, but most often I found freedom in the day in and the day out. Not everything gets solved at the altar. And that's why I will often say, if you do not know how to come boldly, if you want to go to that next scripture, actually probably the next two slides. In Hebrews, one of my favorite verses is, come boldly to the throne of grace. Whether you need grace before you look or after you've looked, we all need grace. And so if you don't know how to come boldly to the throne of grace, not saying, dear God, here I am again, what a failure I am. That's not with your identity intact. Coming boldly before the throne of grace with your head lifted high, knowing you're a son of God. That's not arrogance. That's you believing who God says you are, despite what you feel inside. So come boldly before the throne of grace. How you approach him tells me a whole lot about who you really believe him to be. And most people in here know Christians speak good enough to know what God might say to you. But what I will often ask clients, what I will often ask myself, what I will often ask my friends in those vulnerable, intimate moments is, what's the look on God's face? As you're approaching him boldly, what's the look on his face? And I don't typically ask, what do you think he's going to say to you? Because it's usually, I know God loves me. I know he accepts me. I'm talking about, what's the look on dad's face when you've messed up? Usually, it's disappointment. The look is disappointment, frustration, anger. Here we are again. It's a good thing I'm gracious. That's usually the typical response that we think God has on his face, or the look that God has on his face. And what I challenge people to do is to invite God into your sexuality, not to present it, not to try to create a sanitized version that you can present to him. So before we even deal with triggers to pornography, let's first deal with, how are you approaching God? Because that's probably the bigger deal. I would say it's much more important to God. You having the faith and confidence in who he says he is way more pleasing to his heart than you doing everything right. So what's the look on dad's face? Not just what would he say. What's the look on his face? A book that we have available today, if you want to go to that next slide, is a book called Unwanted. This was released a little over a year ago. His name is Jay Stringer, was the guy that wrote it. And I was lucky enough to be on the launch team for it. So he sent me an advanced copy. I had been following him for the last several months beforehand, and was just totally taken with his approach to sexual issues, unwanted sexual behavior. which kind of encapsulates a lot more than pornography, but certainly includes it. And was able to read that, and to me, this was a game changer, not just for my own life, but for the life of my clients, the life of my friends, the people that I'm intimately connected with, the things that I have seen over and over again. I kind of felt like I was a little strange that I would be so bold to invite God into my sexuality, to bring all of my whole self before God and resist shame, resist the voices of shame that felt very, very real, that felt like they were more true than the pages on Scripture. I felt very weird in saying, like, God, I know that you love me. I know that you accept me. I know the look on your face is kindness. And I can't sin enough to wipe that off your face. I'm not that big. If the look on the creator of the universe's face is wiped, if the kindness is wiped off of his face because of one person's sin, wow, I didn't know I was that powerful. And I have actually learned to glory in this fact that, like, I'm small. Powerful, I am powerful. Authority as an image bearer of God, I am powerful in that way, but not powerful enough to shake the love out of my dad's heart and off of his face. So the whole idea of this book, and we do have these for sale out there because I believe in it so much. I do not cart books around because I want to be more buff than I already am. But I do believe in this book in a very passionate way. And one of the things that he says is, you know what? Your sexual fantasies, they are not random. And I had always understood, really, kind of believed a cultural lie. Well, that's just kind of what you're into. Now, in the church, we're too polite to talk about those things. Now, I've been part of the world enough to be just like, oh, this is what you're into. This is what you're into. That's just kind of what trips my trigger. This is what I'm turned on by. In the church, we don't even talk about those things. We don't even talk about being turned on. But what I love about this is that he talks about our sexual fantasies, the things that we are drawn to, are not random. And so what he will often say, what he says throughout his book, is that if you will start listening to your lust rather than trying to white knuckle it away, it will do more for you than thousands of hours in prayer. Now, don't jump ship. Listen, I've been a Christian for 13 years. I know what we do. You hear something that sounds heretical or sounds different, and we're like, I'm out. Here's what I want you to do, is I want you to at least hear me first. Now, listening to your lust is not the same as obeying it. I'm not saying obey your lust. You'll get into a lot of trouble doing that. But if you will listen to your lust, it has a story to tell you. Because you have been formed and wired, not just by God, but you've also been formed and wired by the world that you have lived in and have grown up in. And your lust will actually tell you a story if you will silence the judgment, or just at least put the judgment to the side long enough to actually hear what it's trying to tell you. But you can only listen if you agree to not judge yourself. You can only listen to something if you aren't already having a stream of thoughts that's agreeing with the enemy that's condemning you. You can only listen if you're kind, curious, and non-judgmental. And you can only do that if you believe God is kind, curious, and non-judgmental. This is why we start with identity. This is why we start with, you've already been accepted and there's nothing you can do about it. You've already been accepted. So you can actually enter into that space with, God, can you help me explore this part of my life, because it keeps coming back up and I've tried to white knuckle it away. I've tried to be good and please you, and it's not working. And anybody that has struggled with pornography or any type of unwanted sexual behavior knows that just white knuckling things away, you might actually find some sobriety, but I'm not talking about sobriety. I'm talking about heart level freedom that lets your soul actually live. Pagan, unbelieving people can find sobriety. I want to know, how do I make my heart come back alive, come back online and live from this place again, rather than just trying to shove things down and shove them away. And go ahead and go to the next slide. He says often, what you type in the search bar really matters. Now, I know this is uncomfortable to think about, but when I've thought about what I have typed in the search bar, when I've asked my clients, hey, when I've built enough trust, because I don't do this session one, but what I will do is I'll be like, hey, if you feel comfortable enough, I'd really like to talk about maybe the more of the specifics of what's going on behind the scenes. What do you type in the search bar? And I say, you don't have to answer that for me, but I want to give you space to think about that for you. If you want to share that with me, you can. But what you type in the search bar matters. There is a certain situation. There are people, body types, situations, and setups that are not random. The things that you are drawn to have a story behind them. It's not just what you're into. People, think about the people, the body types, the situations, and the setups, the posture, the overall tone of what you're looking for. Do you know what that is, or do you just shut it down and hope it goes away? Because if you will invite God into that exploration, I promise you there will be healing for you there. And God, newsflash, God is big enough to handle what you type in the search bar because he was with you when you did it. He didn't leave the room to be more polite. He was with you. And he didn't sit in the corner with a disappointed look on his face. His eyes have never changed with burning fire and passion for you, fiery love for you. You can't change that. And so if you will actually get in tune with that reality, you want to talk about entering into the shame place with God and letting that be destroyed, that's how you do it. And it takes a pretty courageous heart to actually go there. It's easy to pray and fast for freedom. You can do that very impersonally. So, what's your arousal cocktail? Guys, I've been in church long enough. You don't say arousal, you don't say cocktail. Okay? I've been part of this long enough, Ty. We do not talk about arousal templates. And we certainly don't talk about cocktails that we're into. Okay? Especially if you're coming from a holiness denomination or a holiness stream of that. You certainly don't say that. I just said that really more for comedic effect. I figured at this point we'll need to breathe again. Some of you haven't breathed for the last 10 minutes, so. But what's your arousal cocktail? There is something that has been formed in you that God is not ashamed to enter into with you. He is more than okay to enter into that space with you. And so I won't give you specifics of my life for your sake and for mine. But with my therapist, I came up with the top 5 things that I searched for online. And I said, listen, I need to talk about these things with somebody. And it's amazing how when I went into a non-judgmental space with my counselor, with another living human being, and with the God of the universe, how I could see that the things that had played out in my life, those themes were very present in the pornography that I was searching for. And all of this we're just talking about the shame piece. How about all the other drivers that we have, that we don't often think about, that often drive our pornography use? And these will just be kind of one-liners. I won't spend a whole lot of time on these. But shame is for one, shame and fear are huge drivers for the human soul. You want to talk about being in patterns and cycles of addiction. Shame is what keeps us there over and over and over again. If you don't learn how to enter into a place where your shame gets dismantled, you'll keep repeating that cycle. God knows how the human soul is wired. That's why he doesn't judge you. He knows what this all is about for you and why you keep returning to the scene of the crime. He knows it. And he's there waiting with kindness and compassion and non-judgment for you to walk with him and for him to start dismantling the things that have taken hold of your soul. Because it's not just about sex. The problem is not sex, desire, passion. The problem is not even lust. It's usually a lot deeper than that. You can go to that next slide. The first one, futility. Porn says, give me your futility, and I'll give you a world where it all goes away. That's the invitation. The invitation to pornography, the reason that part of pornography has so much power is because it gets rid of the futility in our world for a little bit. And you talk about people who are prone to experiencing the futility. Ministers. I don't know if any of you have all led a church before, but the cycle that you continually go through, that you're pouring your whole heart and soul into something that you believe really, really matters. And you have one couple in the church that creates a church split. One couple that's used by the enemy. One misunderstanding from what I've set up here, and people scatter. That's just in the church. You don't think ministers are continually prone to this feeling of what I do, I think it matters, but I don't see it anywhere out there. You don't think that drives porn use? If I could just escape to a world where everyone's beautiful and the guy always gets the girl and everything always works out. It's a perfect setup. The futility will drive us to continually going back to a world that's make-believe, to get rid of that sense of futility. Because in this world, all that you've built over decades has the possibility to be destroyed in a moment. And I hate that about our world. I hate it. And yet, if we don't know how to deal with our futility in the presence of God, to know that everything can be used to further his kingdom, even the things that we think are completely futile and pointless. Next slide, really quickly. Powerlessness. Porn is the stage on which the story of my powerlessness plays out. And you might think, I'm not really sure about this. It was kind of a hard sell for a lot of clients that I've worked with. But what I have often seen is that there is almost always a power dynamic at play in pornography. And I'm not just talking about like S&M. You didn't think that I was going to go here. This is about as graphic as it's going to be, so you can breathe. I'm not talking about just S&M type of stuff. I'm talking about what people would call normal porn. There is no such thing, by the way. But I'm talking about the things that aren't insanely graphic, or the things that you would say, wow, that's really broken. I'm just watching the normal porn. You guys know how we do. I'm not up here on an island by myself. I'm up here on a stage by myself, but I know that has a grid to land for people. But in pornography, there is almost always a power dynamic at play in pornography. And the person watching, think about this for a second. You may think that you're just a passive person. You're not really engaged in the power dynamic. But the person who clicks, searches, makes people appear, makes people go away, swipe left, swipe right, pause, don't want to see you anymore. You don't think that there's something active going on in the soul that says, I'm the one in control here. And listen, that doesn't mean you're more broken than everyone else. That's a world that makes us feel completely powerless inside because we can't control everything. You don't think pornography's the perfect setup to make you feel back in control of your world again? This does not mean you're more broken. This means you're human, and you're trying to regain a sense of power and control over your world. It makes it understandable. It doesn't make it okay, it makes it understandable. The next one, really quickly, boredom, tied to a lack of purpose. We are wired to be part of a community and continually contribute goodness as a way to elevate, as a way to live out the image of God in us, to be able to contribute goodness to you. Out of what God has put in my heart, I give to you, and it actually makes my heart come alive and makes yours come alive as well. You were created for that. And in a world where maybe we don't feel like we have anything good to give, or that's what we've been told, porn is a drug that creates this alternate reality of on-demand excitement, newness, and mystery for people who are very bored and lack a sense of purpose. The last one, really quickly, loneliness. Porn is a place where you get a feeling of connection without really actually having to be vulnerable. because you were made to connect with other people. You were made for intimacy, and you can't kill that. You can't shove that down enough to get rid of it. And the thing is, intimacy is scary. Being vulnerable is incredibly scary. As a quick example, I want to feel the rush of jumping off the cliff, but I don't actually want to jump. I just kind of want the rush of feelings. I mean, can you imagine me saying like, hey, I really want to go skydiving. I don't actually want to jump out of the plane though. I just want that, like that rush really quickly. That's what pornography does. It makes you feel like you're connected to somebody. You see someone else, you see other people connecting, and there's something in you that says, this feels like connection. But there's nothing that you have to do. There's no jump that you have to take to actually be known by someone else. And guys, I know that I have just hit major themes for people. So what I want you to do, what I need you to do, is take these things into the presence of God and ask God, God, what are the things that are driving my addiction? What are the things that are driving me to these things? And if you will be bold enough and believe God is good enough to handle that in you, God will start working in you, and you'll be able to find soul level freedom. Again, in the Unwanted book, it's split into 3 sections. You can go to that last one. How did I get here? Why do I stay? And how do I get out of here? Pretty simple setup, and it is a very powerful book that we do have for sale out there. And again, what I hope you heard was that this doesn't make it okay. It makes it understandable, and even more understandable to the God of the, so you could understand that God, the reason God is able to be compassionate and kind to you, one of the reasons, is because he gets it. He knows exactly what's going on in your heart. And if you will start approaching God like this, where there used to be contempt for yourself, frustration, and cyclical failure, you can actually replace it with grace, forgiveness, empathy, and kindness, with the presence of God that actually adds to your relationship with God rather than taking away from it. So, will you have enough courage to invite God into your fantasies and let his kindness transform you from the inside out? Thank you.